Hi, and welcome to Amy's Opinions. Today I'm here with my daughter Maggie.
Hi.
It just happens to be my birthday, so for my birthday present, she is going to stop squirming and talk to me about biblical shows. Now, for those of you who don't know, we didn't really raise our children in a church setting. We went to church a few times, but we weren't members of a church. I was raised Catholic. Maggie was baptized in the Catholic Church, but she went to United Methodist Church, and we're just recently going back to Catholic Church again. And if you don't like the Catholics, that's fine. I don't care. That's what we like. It's us. It's how we choose to celebrate our faith. Now, one of the things that we used to do is we used to watch documentaries on the Bible. We used to read the Bible. We had children's Bibles. We had certain biblical shows that her dad and I would preview and say, okay, yeah, this would be good for the kids to watch. And we always had God in our life. It wasn't where we went in every Sunday worship because of jobs and things that other circumstances that we just didn't have time to do. But we always made sure we raised our children with the belief in God. So, yes, I know some of you who watch this may say, oh, you're horrible parents. You didn't do right by your children. You know what? Whatever. Don't care.
We still turned out okay.
I think so. So, for the purpose of today's show, lately we've been watching The Chosen on Amazon. And for those of you that haven't watched that show yet, that's about Jesus, and we're only in the first season, but so far he's gathered all his apostles to him, and we're watching that. And I like those stories. They don't necessarily fall in line with the Bible. There's some, how do I say it? Time wise. There's some things that happen that I didn't think happened in the timeline. But so far, it's done pretty good with showing the parables and the stories of Jesus and how he collected his disciples. That's my belief. Your father and I also started watching David on Amazon, which we've kind of paused because we're watching The Chosen with you right now. There's been several shows throughout the years and movies that are biblically based.
Like every Christmas, or at least every Christmas Eve, we always watch The Nativity, and we watched that movie, and that came out in 2006, the year I was born.
Well, that's one of them. Now, there's other nativity stories that were older that were probably good for their time, but I like the newer versions of the biblical shows. I think they do a much better representation of holding the Bible. And I think that they modernize it so people can understand it better. And when I say modernize, I'm talking about speech. They don't try to do the these, the thous, you know, they put it in a way that's easier to understand. What do you think?
Yeah, that they definitely do that, and it makes it easier to like watch the show and learn what was in the Bible. And yeah, even if some things don't exactly line up, the story or the miracles that happen are still there. And it does showcase like, hey, this is part of the faith and this is what, happens according to the Bible, but here's an easier way to understand it for modern times.
I know we're talking about biblical things, and this is probably going to be an offensive show to some people. And again, this is just our opinions. These are just our questions. These are just different things. Like the other day at dinner, we were talking about the Holy Grail, and there's, for those of you who've watched the Da Vinci Code, they could, oh, maybe that's where this is coming from. Or Raiders of the Lost Ark, or things like that. There's
Or
movies,
Monty Python.
Monty Python's and their quest for the Holy Grail. There's different things. But one of the things that we talked about was, is the Holy Grail actually the cup that was used at the Last Supper? Or is it that when Jesus was alive, it would have been very abnormal for him at that time not to have been married or in an arranged marriage? Was it that he had a family and the church hid the fact that he might have had a child to protect the child and the child's mother when he was crucified? Is that the bloodlines? So, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about that, and I find that fascinating. But bottom line, it comes down to your faith.
And I mean, realistically, given the time period that he lived in, it would have made sense for Jesus to have been married and to potentially have had a child. But also, with how he was living a life kind of on the road and stuff, it could have also made sense for him not to have a family because, there was that inconsistency with him not really having a house, but going from place to place to perform his miracles and to help people.
Well, he was spreading the word of God. Back then, the Jews are very oppressed. If and people look at the Bible and you look at it as history. A lot of it is oral history that's been transcribed. And some of the stories that we have are stories that were transcribed many, many years after they actually happened, but they were passed down through oral history. So that'd be like me saying, hey, it's like the game of telephone. So, I once was told by a priest, you take the Bible with a grain of salt, you look for the message, but you take it with just a little bit of a grain of salt because it is a lot of oral history that was then transcribed. And then it was later transcribed into different languages and later transcribed into different things. So the faith of the Bible is that we're getting the story as closely as what happened as in history, which is why I find biblical documentaries so fascinating because they look back, well, yeah, the Great Flood did happen. We can tell by, geology that there was a Great Flood at some point, and there's several cultures that have that story of a Great Flood. Or, hey, yeah, at this point, this this civilization was here and then it just was decimated. So there's facts that historical facts or documentaries that have been brought up that have proven the stories in the Bible are right. But you also have to look at how much faith you have in those stories. If you're looking at the message and not, well, this happened and exactly happened like this, which is where the shows come in. The shows take the stories and they act the stories out. Do
Mhm.
they act them out exactly how it happened in the Bible?
Probably not.
No, not unless they're time travelers. But does the story coming through, the message coming through?
Yeah, I mean, like you even said, when in The Chosen, it showed one of Jesus's first miracles, which was turning water into wine at the wedding. And he didn't want to do it in public because that would have taken attention off of the bride and the groom. So he wanted to be respectful to them. But that incident happened before he started out and he got in his disciples and stuff. But in the show, he'd already had like Simon slash Peter, Andrew, John.
He had some of his disciples with him, and different versions of that Bible story. He had some of the disciples with him, and some of them it was right before he found some of those disciples. Now, some of his disciples are theorized to have been his actual half siblings.
Like John, because, he was said to have been the most beloved of the disciples. So it's theorized that he could have been Jesus's half brother, and, they had that brotherly bond.
And something else that we were talking about the other day. And again, people are going to find this offensive. Do I believe this? No, I believe Jesus was a prophet. I believe he was the Messiah. Did he come about and bring a physical kingdom to earth where he overtook the Romans? No, he brought a spiritual kingdom. He taught peace, love, and that's when you see when Jesus came in from a vengeful God to a more caring God. So it's sort of like, the only way I can really describe this, and again,
Jesus gave
God
a new way of teaching
God
God.
is perfect. So when God was vengeful, we're made in his image. And he was very frustrated at some of the things we did. That's why we had the flood. That's why we had, the salt where the pillar of salt where Sodom and Gomorrah and she looked back, Lot's wife looked back and she turned into salt. God was a very vengeful God. He kicked Adam and Eve after he gave them a temptation and said, hey, don't eat from this tree of knowledge, and then they ate from it. He kicked them out of the garden.
But to be fair, in those incidents, he had been warning the people, like, hey, if you keep doing this, I'm going to do this. Like with Sodom and Gomorrah, he sent down several angels telling the people, hey, you need to change how you're living. Otherwise, God's going to wipe you out completely. They didn't change how they were living after several messengers, and God was like, okay, wipe them out, like just as he told them. Adam and Eve said, do not eat from this fruit. They did. They got kicked out of Eden, but they had also been told, do not do this. There will be consequences if they do.
So you know what that reminds me of?
A parent?
A parent, especially a brand new parent who's never been a parent before, who gets very, very frustrated with their kids
I know.
and disciplines. That's what it reminds me of. When my children were younger, I was very, you're gonna do this, time out. You're gonna do this, I'm taking this away. You're gonna do this, it's okay, you know what? That's spanking time because you put someone in danger. That sort of a thing. That's what the New Testament reminds me of. It's God treating us kind of like a parent. He was a vengeful God. But he was also a giving God, but they kind of didn't show that so much. So he sent his son to earth, which again, this is going to sound weird, but we had a child, and not Maggie. God love her, not Maggie. Her sister
Okay.
was a very difficult toddler, and we didn't know how to handle her.
Yeah, it was a good one.
And we didn't want to be abusive. So we went to counseling with her sister to get different ideas on how to become better parents because we were worried about being abusive. Because we wanted to be a better parent. We didn't want to be the abusive type parent. So to me, when Jesus comes down to earth and he's born a man, he's son of man, son of God, and he's teaching a different way of acting. That's like an evolution in parenting. Is God still vengeful? Yes, but has he learned a different way of parenting that's maybe coming out in a different way so people listen? Quite possibly. But then you look at what's going on in the world now. We still have wars. The Middle East is always embroiled in some sort of conflict. They have never, ever, as far as I know, had peace. We have scandals. We have people who don't respect one another. They don't do unto others as they would have done unto them. And we're seeing more and more of that. So it makes me fearful that that vengeful God will come back because we've done walking in shoes, giving, and things like that. But if it doesn't work, when will that happen?
I think when it comes to that, even when God was viewed as the vengeful God of the Old Testament, he was still warning people. He was still saying, if you do this, this will be the outcome. So to me, that's not really vengefulness. It's more of him saying, hey, this is going to be the consequence of these actions. I'm giving you ample time to change. I'm giving you ample warnings to change. You're not changing. You have to face the consequences of your actions. And this is just the consequences. I've given you this many warnings. And like kind of going back to the parenting thing, you know, we would get ample warnings and then it'd be like, okay, you didn't stop. Now you're getting punished. We gave you a chance to stop. And I think we're starting to enter more of the warning stage where, because a lot of people are saying that some of the warning signs from biblical days are coming back.
Or are we just missing them? I mean, look at the Spanish flu. Look at the Great Depression. Look at COVID. Before that, we had the swine flu. Look at the fall of economies. Look at the creation of AI. When they had the Rosetta Stone, and people were trying to build and build and build, and we had all these people that could understand each other because we had the Rosetta Stone, right? And they're trying to build all the way up to heaven, and it got destroyed.
Like I said, it's a good thing I'm human and not an angel because I would have probably fallen that day.
But my question is, are we ignoring the signs? Do we have time to redeem ourselves? And in that case, then let's loop back to these shows. Are these shows a good reminder to people that even with the technology that we have, we are still made in God's image and we need to look at our history so that we don't repeat it? And the Bible shows us the history. These shows act out the history. Is that another
Well,
way of us seeing that?
I think we are getting a warning sign from God in the form of some of what's happening to California with like their fires and stuff. Because if you look at what John writes about the rapture with the massive fires and all this and that, with the droughts and stuff, when I read that, it kind of reminded me of California because we're seeing a lot of that there.
And is that because California is kind of stupid with their forestry department, or is it a sign?
I think it's a bit of both because the way that it lines up, like it's not exact, but they do have some issues, not as bad as like the Midwest does with their locust population, but they also are having these great big wildfires and like stuff. They're going through droughts, crops are getting destroyed. So I think it is kind of warning because I read what John had said about what would happen at the end of times. And it kind of does sound like it is a warning sign. Some of it definitely is the fact that California doesn't they don't have good policies when it comes to like controlled burns and stuff like that. And they forget that even Native Americans would do controlled burns to prevent massive fires like what they have.
So what they're trying that's newer instead of trying what historically has worked in the past.
Yeah.
So we're not looking at our history.
No.
We're making mistakes. So my question, are these shows helpful? Do you think if more people saw these shows, they would look at the shows and what's happening in the shows and compare them to what's happening now?
I think some people will. I think others would just view it as like fiction because you always have that where people just watch it for the entertainment factor. But I think a lot of people would look at it and start to question, okay, this is odd. This is kind of similar because one of the reasons why Jesus was sent down as the Messiah when he was, it seemed like it was at a time when people were like, it wasn't a religion for everyone anymore. You had the higher up religious leaders. And even now in Christianity, it's like this now where,
The higher up religious leaders are making all kinds of money where they're not spreading it around.
yeah, where they're super rich, they have all of these riches and stuff. And then everyone else is kind of, trying to think about how to put it into
Remember
words.
when we were talking the other day in the car that Jesus was preaching more of a socialism? That, if you have something someone doesn't, one, you share what you have, so no one goes hungry.
But then you
two,
also teach them a skill.
teach them a skill so that way they don't go hungry. So not completely socialist, but kind of along those things. You make sure that you're looking out for others as you would look out for you and your own family, not to the point of being detrimental to your family, but you also teach them how to care for themselves. You don't just say, "Oh, they're poor, I'm not going to deal with them." You help people out. And by the way, just as a little plug, Pope Leo, who's our first American pope, listens to this. My daughter Maggie's excellent at finding things. And if you should listen to this, Your Eminence, why don't you give Maggie a ride over to the Vatican City and let her go through your archives and things like that and your treasure trove? I'm sure she could find the Holy Grail for you. But she's good at finding lost things. Okay, back to our show.
Or I can find something else that's been lost.
Yeah, Maggie's great at it. She finds my stuff all the time. She found a pocket knife on her archaeology dig from the 18th century. I mean, she is great at finding things. So again, that's my plug. So one of the things I like about The Chosen, and we're just gonna, because that's the one that we're watching right now, is I like how human it makes the apostles seem. Because if you look at it, you kind of think these were holy men, they were great. You forget that Jesus recruited from the sinners. He targeted the people who were sinning to help fix them, not fix them, to help them atone for their sins, learn from their mistakes, and then preach to others his message. So Simon, he was a gambler, he was a hustler, he wasn't that good of a guy, was he?
Nope.
And he became better for knowing Jesus and for having God in his life. And I think that's the most important message with these biblical shows. Having God in your life leads to a better life. Doing good gets good done unto you. God's message isn't always apparent. We may miss it. We may not see it for years and say, oh, yeah, hey, that was a hit on the head. Do better. Things happen without us knowing why they happen. But the thing I like about biblical shows is if you're a visual learner, and they're a good show, it's a good interpretation, and it's another way of seeing God. Because God isn't in physical form per se. Now, personally, I think my kids are a gift of God. And when they are doing well, I see God shine through them when they're doing well to others. Am I saying my kids are gods? No,
No.
absolutely not. But they are a gift from God.
We would be terrible gods
Horrible.
because we're human.
We're human. We make mistakes. So that's about it for the show. And again, this might be a very offensive show to some people. And for some people, it may be helpful. And other people, whatever. This is a conversation for my daughter and I. Thank you for joining. And have a good day.
Have a good one.